This morning I bring you greetings on behalf of my congregation in New Haven, the United Church on the Green, as well as I hold dual membership at Park Avenue Christian Church in New York City. And I bring you greetings on behalf of my denomination, which is your sister denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And it is, like I said, I have malaria pills thrown through my veins, my backpack is packed, my poor fiance is at home getting paperwork all put together so we can do this. But I am thrilled to be with you this morning, and I thank you so much, Reverend Tracy and Reverend Sara, for inviting me to be with you. For a pastor who doesn't have a church, it's good to get in a pulpit every now and then. You know, as a child, I was absolutely obsessed with the TV show Saved by the Bell. Every Saturday morning, this show about a California group of high school kids demanded my attention. I was especially in love with the dating relationship between two characters named Zach and Kelly. Zach was cool. He was mischievous, and Kelly was the popular and kind cheerleader. The perfect couple. They were everything that a third grader in Iowa thought a high school experience should be. And at one point in the storyline, I was getting a little worried. Kelly was flirting with another guy. I could see this happening, I could see the storyline coming up, and one Saturday morning I knew something good was going to happen on this episode. So I got myself on the couch, all ready to see the show, and my mom said, "Time to go to the grocery store." Nuh-uh, not leaving this couch, something good is going to happen. But she wasn't having that excuse, because last time she left me without a parent in the house, somehow all of the cookies disappeared. So I was forced to go to the grocery store. And when I got home, my brother informed me that I had missed the best episode ever. I still have not forgiven my mother for missing this episode where Zach and Kelly break up. This solidified my fear of missing out, also known as FOMO, F-O-M-O, which is an actual sociological phenomenon that people have studied. According to a survey in the US and UK, people between the ages of 18 and 34 express that they want to say yes to everything because they have a fear of missing out. Many people in my age bracket are continually afraid that they will miss out on something amazing. I wonder if Thomas felt the same pain that I felt when I missed Zach and Kelly breaking up when he heard that he missed Jesus coming to town. I wonder if Thomas struggled with FOMO as much as I do. I wonder, why the heck was he the only one who was not in the room when Jesus came? Shouldn't he have been cowering in fear too? You know, when I was a kid, I believed a lot of things. I believed that I could simply look on a star and wish on it from my farm, and that wish would come true. When I got older, in the church that my family belonged to, they made sure that I knew the ancient creeds of the church that told me exactly what a good Christian little boy believes in. And I believed. Then I got older and I went to a Christian college and I went to seminary and I read wonderful books of great theologians and great philosophers and great thinkers, and I opened my mind to a new worldview, and I found worldviews that mixed with mine, and this is what I believed. Throughout my life, believing and thinking were the same thing. But this isn't what belief is to the author of the Gospel of John. Belief to John is never a noun. It's always a verb. Believing is less about what you think and more about what you do. Believing to the author of the Gospel of John is not creedal, but it's relational. Thomas is often called a doubter, but by looking at this text, that doesn't make any sense. He is the only one who has left a locked room. He is the only one that is striving to be in relationship with people on the outside world. Maybe Thomas isn't a doubter. Maybe Thomas is a doer. Thomas could be out making sure that the church that is behind closed doors has enough food to survive. Maybe Thomas is out preaching the gospel to people on the streets. Maybe Thomas is serving the poor like Jesus has told him to. Maybe Thomas is in Disneyland. John doesn't tell us where he is. So when Thomas says, unless I see the mark of the nails in your hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in the side, I will not believe, what he is really saying is, I'm afraid I'm busy doing stuff already. I'm not going to turn my life around just because you tell me to, fellow disciples who cower here in fear. Thomas isn't a doubter. Thomas is a doer. I threw myself on my bed and I began to cry. What had I done? The seminary thing sounded like a great idea the year before. I was living in a rough neighborhood in Kansas City, leaving my safe little tiny Iowa farm. I had to drive on an interstate to get anywhere in this terrible city, and I heard gunshots on my window, which I told my friends were just firecrackers. I promised myself that I was going to stick it out 1 year. 6 years later, I said goodbye to my friends that I loved with all of my heart. I said goodbye to a city that was my home. I said goodbye to a youth ministry that I had worked so hard to build from the ground up. But I was being called to do something new. I packed up my tiny little car and I threw a few possessions in and I set off on a new adventure. I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I sat on a mountain in the middle of the desert and I began to cry. What had I done? I had made it in Kansas City. I had friends. I was now again a stranger in a very strange land. And this was only for a year. But over that year, volunteering as an HIV educator, I developed a passion for working for the health and well-being of mistreated communities. I had friends and loved ones who were homeless. I had friends and loved ones who were HIV positives. Their struggles were no longer just things I read about in my social justice books. Their struggles were my struggles. Their lives were intertwined with mine. I was being called to return back to the church, and a congregation in Chicago called my name. I sat in my tiny apartment in Chicago, and I began to cry. What had I done? I left the beautiful New Mexican desert for a cold Chicago winter? What the heck? And instead of wandering the streets helping people that needed me, I was arguing about whether or not we could sing Christmas songs during Advent. And the answer is no, we cannot. I strove to take this small congregation that had seen its heyday in the 80s to Congregational health. I learned that with leadership, I can't win every battle. I learned that a leader in a church has to be able to cast vision while being willing to unclog the toilet on the same day. In Chicago, I fell in love. And I do what people in love tend to do. I followed my heart. My fiance got a job here in New Haven, and so it was time for me to leave Chicago and come to New Haven. I searched for a church, but there was nothing really that fit. So I got a job at Bill Don. Today, I walk the halls of Central High School. I never, ever mention the name of Jesus. But I do work hard to teach our students how to give. I work hard to make sure that every student who walks through that door has a safe space in my office. I work in a diverse community that I adore. You see, and that wasn't easy. I left behind a church that I loved, but I'm slowly discovering this whole New England thing is not half bad. The people aren't as cranky as I thought when I first got here. Just a tough nut to crack every now and then. Every place I've lived, I've discovered resurrection. It's painful. It's so scary for the old things to pass away. For part of yourself to fall away. But every single Good Friday has an Easter. I promise you, every Good Friday has an Easter. Maybe that's what the disciples need to hear this morning. They don't need to be afraid anymore. And that's what Jesus tells them. Peace. Leave fear behind. But this whole question about Thomas isn't answered yet. Where is he? Thomas is out doing God knows what, and the rest are hiding behind a locked door and terrified. It's not only the locked door that's keeping them in, it's fear. And let me be clear, they have a lot to be afraid of. Their leader was just brutally murdered so that he could be made an example of, and they know that if it happened to him, it could happen to them as well. Thomas is out there doing God knows what, and then Jesus comes to them, and he doesn't just talk to them. He doesn't just give them a pep talk. He goes further. He brings them peace. He knows they are afraid, and he lets them see his side, and he tells them to go out and be like Thomas and do something. He breathes on them. The book of Genesis tells us that all of the cosmos began with the breath of God. Did you know the word in Hebrew for breath is also the word for wind, is also the word for spirit? So Jesus breathes on them and gives their community a brand new creation, a brand new start. They have to leave fear behind. But this is great for them, but what about poor Thomas the doer, who has been out? Where is he, and what is he to do? In 1933, the Great Depression was ravaging our country. People were living and begging and starving on the streets. And there was a group of Catholics that wanted to express their belief on how God called for them to care for people. And they began the Catholic Worker newspaper. It expressed dissatisfaction with the social order, and it took the side of labor unions, but its vision of the ideal future challenged both urbanization and industrialism. It wasn't only radical, but it was religious. And in this paper, during the early parts of the 1930s, it said that every house should have an extra room to invite someone in. Everyone should be like this congregation and express radical hospitality. Well, in the winter of 1933, after this had been published for about 3 years, people started knocking at their doors going, "Are you serious about what you wrote? Because I need a place to stay." Dorothy Day and Peter Maron, who were the editors of the Catholic Worker, said, "Yeah, we are serious about this." And they began the Catholic Worker movement that invited people in from off the streets. Many of the guests were surprised that in contrast with most charities, no one at the Catholic Worker House said about reforming them. Nobody gave them a list of things that they had to believe. Nobody told them what to do with their lives. They were simply welcomed in and loved. There were people who thought they were crazy to do this, that housing people was dangerous. And maybe it was, but Dorothy Day responded, "Love casts out fear. But we have to get over that fear in order to get close enough to love them. In order to love the other, we must get over our fear. Be in relationship." Sometimes it just takes the breath of God for us to get out the door. The disciples are huddled in fear. They are terrified of what will happen to them if they leave. How many times in life are we looking at a transition, looking at a loss, looking at a new stage, and we find ourselves wrapped in fear? The person who has lived their entire lives identifying as what they do for work is facing retirement, and they have a list of questions. The wife buries her husband and wonders, "What am I going to do?" The high school senior looks at the college options and tries to figure out, who am I going to be? The parent loses her job and is desperate to figure out, what do I do next? Fear creeps in, Good Friday happens, and there is a loss. But here's the good news. We are welcomed to that table right there, and we hear peace. The friend calls and offers an ear. The loving partner holds your hand when you're afraid to take the next step. The church offers a place to have a meal on Thursday nights. When these things happen, I can almost hear the breath of God's creation being shared. Somehow, Thomas already knew this. Somehow, Thomas already knew that he had to live into Easter. Where was Thomas when Jesus appeared to the other disciples? Maybe it just doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that because of the love that is God, the community left their fear behind, and they went out to change the world. Can you hear the breath of God this morning? because we are called to do the same. Amen.